our goal is to get children out of institutional orphanages and into families because every child deserves a family.
For our Be the Change segment this month, we are featuring The Hope Effect, an organization dedicated to changing the way the world cares for orphans. I've invited the founder of The Hope Effect, Joshua Becker, back on the show today, and he's joined by the executive director of The Hope Effect, Joe Darago. We're going to discuss the life of an orphan and what that looks like globally and what The Hope Effect is doing to help. Welcome to the show, Joshua and Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks for
having
me.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to have you back and to discuss a really important topic. So let's talk about the state of institutional orphan care globally. Why is this something people should care about?
Thanks so much. We appreciate being able to speak on behalf of the orphan. There are roughly, it's hard to really nail down because orphans aren't seen legally oftentimes. Nobody registers them at a hospital. Legal status can be a big challenge for them. But roughly there's about 15 million orphans worldwide. And about 2.5 to 3 million of them are living inside a public or private orphanage. And inside of those orphanages, there is long-term damage being done to these children.
Yeah. What are the common reasons kids end up in orphan care?
Great. Well, there's really two types of orphanages. When you think about it, there's public orphanages, those that the governments run, and there are private orphanages, often funded by individuals or religious organizations, good-hearted people. In public orphanages, children get into those the same reason kids get into CPS here in the States. Abandonment, abuse, alcohol, drug-related issues, death, that type of thing. For some reason, the government gets custody of a child and puts them into an orphanage that they run, a public orphanage. On the private side, the number one contributor, by far, is actually finances, poverty. A scenario that we see play out often is a poor family has multiple children. They're unable to make enough money to care for them. And so they want their kids to get better food. They want their kids to have a better education. And so they lovingly relinquish their children into an orphanage to give them a better chance of life. And interestingly, about 80% of children in private orphanages have at least one living parent that they could live with if the family had enough finances to care for them.
Joe's story is really quite fascinating in even how the whole Hope Effect was founded. Joe's adopted 2 children. He adopted a baby from South Korea and then a 12-year-old from Thailand. And really night and day experiences at home with the 2 children. I had signed a book deal to write a couple books. I write about minimalism and owning less. And so we wanted to use the money from the books to start a nonprofit organization of some sort. My wife was adopted, and so that was where our passion always was, which led me to a conversation with Joe, who's actually been a friend for over 25 years. And he began sharing with me the studies that we've known for decades, that children who grow up in institutional orphanages, a whole bunch of kids and just a couple of adults, that brains just don't develop. They fall behind in every stage of human development than someone who grows up in a family and gets the attention and affection. You just imagine a whole bunch of kids and workers coming in and out, just not getting the attention and interaction that they would in a family. And we've known for decades. And so that's really the problem as we see it and what we're working to help solve.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit then, Joshua. What is the Hope Effect doing to help with the issue?
So what we do primarily, our goal is to change the way the world cares for orphans. And we work in developing nations. Most developed nations have moved past institutional orphanages. If you picture America, we use the foster care system. So this understanding that families are better. But in a lot of developing nations where the laws need to be rewritten or parents need to be trained or there's just the economics of the issue, we work in those nations, we work in those countries, and we work with legislatures. We work to find families. And our goal is to get children out of institutional orphanages and into families because every child deserves a family.
Yeah, so real practically speaking, outside the U.S., we start foster care where it doesn't exist. We reunify children back out of private orphanages and into their families where it's possible. And then we have programs to prevent children from ever going in to an orphanage by helping families become financially stable enough through different, having them learn how to have more earnings, learn how to budget their money better, and then they can care for their own children and they won't have to put them into an orphanage. And then inside the U.S. here, we're really trying to bring about awareness about the problem. So you having us on the podcast is huge. A recent study revealed that $2.5 billion leaves the pockets of people in the U.S. to fund orphanages around the world, in which 80% of those kids are not orphans at all. And so us just getting that message out will hopefully help channel that 2.5 billion in a better way and really provide more family solutions for kids, which they deserve, and which helps them grow and develop in a better way.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message, Joe and Joshua. Thank you so much for sharing that and your mission. Talk to us about some real life examples of this impact. I think that helps people to understand maybe a family that's been impacted or an orphan that's been impacted by your program.
I'll share one of my favorite stories, and Joe probably has a dozen more. But JJ was born in Hermosillo in January 2020. His mother was unable to care for him, and so dropped him off at a hospital at 4 days old, where he was quickly put into an institutional orphanage in the city. That was January 2020. 2 months later, COVID hit. And just as he was becoming aware of his surroundings, just becoming aware of the people in his life and the adults in his life, they were all required to wear masks. We moved JJ into a family, Moises and Hansel, at 1.5 years old. JJ spent the first 1.5 years of his life never seeing an adult smile, never seeing any facial expressions because of the laws, and they were in place because they were in place. And it's just a perfect example of the difference between a family and an orphanage. One of the most meaningful stories that I can think of. I'm sure Joe has another one.
Well, and you think about it, when most kids were learning how to copy their parents' smile, I mean, JJ was never seeing a smile, right? And so, and most of the caregivers inside the orphanage are women. And so he, for the first 18 months of his life, never really interacted even with a man or a father figure. So when he came into our foster family and they took him home and they took off their masks for the first time, and this is really some of the earliest moments in his life where he'll remember seeing an actual face all the way. He was a pretty stoic kid, pretty stone-faced, and at 18 months, he wasn't even walking yet. And that we see that very common in kids raised in an institution. Developmentally, they don't hit those milestones at the right time. And so within 30 days, he started walking. And shortly after that, he actually began to run. He started finding his voice. He started being expressive with his face. And man, we saw dramatic life change in just a few months in that kid's life. And we see this time and time again as we get to experience the joy of seeing a kid get out of an institution where he didn't belong and into the loving arms of a family who invest in him. It's super meaningful for us and for our team.
Oh, I love that. We are all about family on this show, and we're all about helping where we can, too, with the abundance that we have in our lives. So let's talk about where you hope this organization will go, call it over the next 5 to 10 years. What are your hopes and dreams for the Hope Effect?
Sure. We actually just worked through a little 5-year session here at the Hope Effect. And since it's a financial podcast, I'll lead off with the finances. We're averaging right now around 450,000. It will be hopefully our annual income this year. And we are able to do a lot with that, but we really have an appetite to really see significant change happen around the world. So we're shooting in the next 5 years to get that to an annual income of $1 million. The good news is 80 to 84% of our money goes directly to projects. And because of how we're structured, we actually have people that pay for our U.S. administrative side. And so our fundraising and administrative costs are paid for by people who know it, so that the individual donating can actually give 100% of their money straight towards projects. We want to see over 500 kids out of orphanages and into the loving arms of families in the next 5 years. And we're really hopeful in our flagship locations in Mexico, which is in the state of Sonora and Michoacan, that we'll get, with the government's help, we'll get to a spot where no child under 3 will ever go into an orphanage. And that is really critical, because that's when they develop the most in their physical brain, and their attachment towards adults is developed in those first 3 years. And so we're really hoping that we can really stop any kid from under 3 ever going into an orphanage in those locations in the next 5 years.
That is beautiful. Well, if you guys are moved right now by listening to the words of Joe and Joshua here, let's talk to them about how they could maybe give their time, their money, their voice to support your organization. Where should they go?
You can go to hopeeffect.com, learn more about us. You can actually make a cash donation there. You can learn how you can donate stock or donate from your donor advised fund. There's also opportunities to volunteer on our website, and you can connect with me directly. My email is joe@hopeeffect.com. We're on the 3 major social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can follow us along there, of course. And boy, we would love you to invite Joshua and I to come speak at your church, your civic group, or do a happy hour Zoom with us and your friends. We would just love to be able to get the message out about what orphans are facing, about the broken way that we're supporting them here in the U.S., and how we could really change the world by helping every child find the loving arms of a family.
And I'll just add, I invite you to jump in a couple dollars, $5, $10, all the way up. I mean, don't feel like you need to be able to give a huge amount to be part of this change that we're bringing about in the world. Any donation that you have, we would put to good use and would love to have you a part of our team working to change the way the world cares for orphans.
Absolutely. Yeah. Lots of huge change can happen globally in our country when people chip in, even if it's small.
Yeah.
That starts to pile on, and we create a movement. We create a movement of a world we want to be in. We create a movement of the country we want to have, and we can be the change. It's beautiful. Joe and Joshua, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
you.
Andy.